It sat there, innocent, unassuming. A simple brown package. No one screamed. No warning. Just a quiet knock as the mail carrier moved on, unaware of what they had just delivered. The box lay in the corner of a university mailroom. Days passed, then weeks, until someone eventually opened it. And with a violent mechanical snap, chaos. For nearly 2 decades, packages like this would appear on doorsteps, in office corners, in airport lounges. Each one held within it the same message: the world is sick. I will cure it. The man behind them wasn't seeking ransom, fame, or revenge. He didn't sign his name. He left no fingerprints. He wanted something far more dangerous. He wanted to be heard. This is the story of a brilliant child, a broken student, a hermit with a mission. This is the story of Ted Kaczynski. This is the mind of a killer. Born on May 22, 1942 in Chicago, Ted Kaczynski arrived into a modest working-class family. His parents, Wanda and Theodore Sr., were proud, loving, and strict believers in discipline and achievement. Ted was the first child, quiet, observant, almost too still for his age. At 9 months old, he suffered a severe allergic reaction, resulting in a prolonged hospitalization. For days, the infant lay isolated, separated from his mother's touch, confined behind hospital walls. When Ted returned home, Wanda would later say, "He was different. He didn't smile. He wouldn't look at us the same." From that point on, Ted became what some would call a ghost child. He excelled in school but avoided friends. He preferred solitude, puzzles, and patterns. His younger brother David admired him deeply, but even David saw the distance that no one could cross. Teachers called him gifted. Psychologists called him sensitive. But inside, Ted was already withdrawing from the world. At age 16, Ted was accepted into Harvard University, one of the youngest students in its history. He wasn't ready. Harvard in the late 1950s was a place of brilliance, privilege, and intensity. For Ted, it was also a laboratory of cruelty. At just 16 years old, Ted Kaczynski stepped onto the campus of Harvard University, carrying nothing but his books and the weight of his brilliance. But Harvard was not a place built for fragile minds. It was a place of ambition, competition, and silent cruelty. And for Ted, younger, smaller, socially withdrawn, it was overwhelming. He wandered through crowded lecture halls and bustling dining rooms like a ghost among the living. He was isolated not by force, but by nature. He simply didn't fit. Then in 1959, Ted was approached to participate in a research program run by renowned psychologist Dr. Henry A. Murray. It was described as a study on personality and personal development. Ted agreed, likely hoping to earn some extra money and contribute to science. He had no idea what he was walking into. The so-called study was anything but benign. It began innocently enough. Ted was asked to write a detailed essay about his deepest personal beliefs, his philosophy of life, and his core values. For Ted, who already had a sharp mind and a strong distrust of authority, this was a private reflection, something sacred. But Murray had other plans. What followed were 3 years of what many would later call psychological torture. Ted was repeatedly brought into a sterile room. Facing him was a mock interrogator, trained to attack, ridicule, and systematically dismantle Ted's beliefs. The interrogations were brutal, every weakness exposed, every belief mocked. Sessions were filmed, monitored, and repeated for over 200 hours. Ted sat helplessly as everything he believed in was used against him, all under the cold glow of Harvard's fluorescent lights. His emotional withdrawal only deepened. He later called the experience the worst of my life. And yet he told no one, not his parents, not his beloved younger brother David. Ted endured it alone. When the experiment ended, he remained physically intact. but something inside had shifted. Some argue this was the moment Ted's alienation became something darker. His isolation no longer just a quirk. It had become the soil in which the seeds of resentment, paranoia, and anger would grow. And yet, Ted pushed on. He graduated, then went on to earn a PhD in mathematics at the University of Michigan, producing a dissertation so complex that even seasoned professors struggled to understand it. He then accepted a prestigious position at UC Berkeley, but within just 2 years, he walked away. No letter, no explanation. He vanished, not just from academia, but from society itself. Ted Kaczynski didn't drift away quietly. He disappeared with purpose. He left Berkeley. He left the lectures, the campus politics, and the mathematicians who admired his work. He left everything. By 1971, Ted reemerged deep within the forests of Lincoln, Montana. Far from highways, far from power lines, far from the machine. What he built there wasn't just a cabin, it was a fortress, a deliberate rejection of the modern world. The structure itself was humble. Just a 10 by 12-foot shack crafted by his own hands. No electricity, no plumbing, no comforts. Inside, a wood-burning stove, a cot and a crude wooden desk, stacks of books on anarchism, ecology, chemistry, and mechanical engineering, a corner devoted solely to bomb-making experiments. Outside, a latrine dug deep into the earth, a garden where he attempted, mostly unsuccessfully, to grow crops, and endless miles of wilderness. But Ted wasn't there to survive. He was there to wage war. In complete isolation, he wrote thousands of pages in coded journals, meticulously recording his thoughts on technology as a prison, his surveillance of nearby towns, universities, and corporate developments, his experiments with explosive devices, his growing anger at the industrial society enslaving humanity. Ted watched the logging companies carve into Montana's forests. He saw trucks grind across old paths, trees felled, rivers polluted, power lines strung like iron spider webs. To Ted, this wasn't progress, it was an invasion. In one journal entry, he wrote, "I can't just sit here and do nothing while the forests die." And so he shifted from theory to practice. He began testing bombs, first small, then larger. He chronicled each one in code, rating their effectiveness like a cold scientist. Ted wasn't unraveling. He was calibrating. In his mind, he wasn't a recluse. He was a soldier, fighting what he believed was a war to save humanity from itself. May 25th, 1978. A package appeared at the University of Illinois at Chicago. It seemed harmless, ordinary, a small brown-wrapped parcel addressed to a professor. But when opened, it exploded, injuring a university security guard. For the FBI, it was perplexing. It was crudely made, assembled from scraps of metal and wood. But Ted, writing hundreds of miles away in his cabin, wasn't disappointed. In his coded journal, he recorded, "Experiment 1, success." This was not a crime of passion. It was a calculated experiment. Ted saw himself as a scientist conducting a controlled study. The cause, industrial society. The subject, humanity itself. And the results, pain, fear, uncertainty. The packages kept coming. Each one evolved. They became more precise, more lethal, more patient. Bombs disguised as academic research submissions, technical manuals, personal packages, airline cargo. Each bomb was handmade, each component individually tested. Inside his journals, Ted categorized every attempt like a sterile laboratory entry. Experiment 5, partial success. Experiment 8, injured target, moderate effect. But to the outside world, it looked random. Ted mailed bombs to Airline executives, computer store owners, university professors, even passengers aboard commercial planes, an escalation that changed the course of FBI history. In 1979, a bomb planted aboard American Airlines Flight 444 caused smoke and an emergency landing. Had it detonated fully, the aircraft could have been lost. The FBI knew then. This wasn't just a prankster. This was someone declaring war. The Unabomber Task Force was born. By 1980, over 150 agents were actively working the case. And yet, Ted remained invisible. He left no fingerprints, no fibers, no DNA. The bombs themselves offered no clues, their craftsmanship too unique, their components too ordinary to trace. What they did find repeatedly were the letters FC marked inside. It became the Unabomber's signature. It stood for Freedom Club, Ted's private name for his personal revolution. For the public, terror became a constant. Universities installed metal detectors. Airlines feared every package. Academics, executives, and scientists second-guessed every piece of mail. For Ted, it was working. In his cabin, he tracked the news. He cut out articles. He noted the public's growing fear. And still, the FBI searched in the wrong places. They profiled the Unabomber as a mechanic, failed engineer, airline employee. Ted Kaczynski, the Harvard-trained mathematician, coded journal keeper, and reclusive philosopher, wasn't even on their radar. In truth, Ted watched the investigation unfold like a chess game. And in his coded journals, he noted, "They don't know where to look." Meanwhile, Ted was refining not just his bombs, but his purpose. He wasn't content with random bombings. He wanted to deliver his message. The question was, would the world finally listen? By 1995, Ted Kaczynski had crafted more than bombs. He had crafted an ideology. Inside his cabin were stacks of handwritten essays, treatises, and journal entries. All of them pointed toward one conclusion. Industrial society must be dismantled. Violence is not only justified, it is necessary. But Ted realized that scattered explosions weren't enough. If the world was to change, it had to understand why. And so, he wrote his most dangerous creation yet. A 35,000-word manifesto titled Industrial Society and Its Future. It wasn't raving madness. It was coherent, structured, and chillingly articulate. Ted laid out a theory of how technology had enslaved modern humans, a call to reject modern industrial systems, a justification for violent revolution. He mailed it, not as a letter, but as a demand. In 1995, the New York Times and Washington Post received an anonymous threat. "Publish this manifesto in full, or I will continue to kill." The FBI faced a dilemma. If they published it, they risked emboldening the bomber. If they refused, more lives could be lost. After tense debate, they agreed to publish. And with that, the world finally heard the Unabomber. The manifesto sent shockwaves beyond law enforcement. Journalists, philosophers, and even environmentalists, people who would have never condoned violence, admitted that parts of the critique were disturbingly familiar. Had Ted's bombs remained unseen acts of terror, he may have faded into the shadows. But through words, he entered the public consciousness. For the first time, the FBI had something more powerful than fragments of wood and metal. They had a voice, and one man recognized it instantly. Thousands read the manifesto. Academics debated its arguments. Environmentalists dissected its warnings. Law enforcement scoured it for hidden clues. But for one man, it wasn't the content that stood out. It was the voice. David Kaczynski knew his brother's words when he saw them. Ted had mailed David countless letters over the years. long, rambling essays filled with anti-technology rants, references to freedom, autonomy, and human dignity. Ted's unique way of forming sentences, his favored phrases, his precise logic, they were all there, echoing from the pages of the Unabomber manifesto. David's wife, Linda, said what David was afraid to. "This sounds like your brother." David resisted the thought. For weeks, he reviewed old letters Ted had sent from Montana, comparing them line by line to the manifesto. The match was undeniable. In the pit of his stomach, David knew. Ted was the Unabomber. But how do you turn in your own brother? David wasn't just confronting the horror of Ted's crimes. He was confronting his own loyalty, his childhood memories, his own belief that deep down, Ted might still be the gentle older brother he had once idolized. The decision tore him apart. Eventually, David approached a private attorney, who in turn contacted the FBI, with one condition: David wanted Ted captured alive. The FBI, desperate and running out of leads, jumped on the tip. It was the break they had waited for. But they still needed more. They asked David for samples of Ted's old writings, details about his past behavior, any known addresses. David cooperated fully, providing them with Ted's letters. Linguists were called in. The technique was cutting edge at the time. Forensic linguistics. Comparing Ted's letters to the manifesto, experts found identical phrasing patterns, recurring vocabulary, consistent structure. The probability of coincidence? Slim to none. After almost 18 years, the Unabomber was no longer just a shadow. He was Ted Kaczynski, and the net was closing. David would later describe it as the most agonizing decision of his life, saying, "I wasn't turning in a criminal, I was turning in my brother." April 3rd, 1996. The remote forests surrounding Lincoln, Montana were still heavy with the chill of early spring when FBI agents quietly converged on a clearing known only to locals as the home of a strange recluse. Nestled among the towering pines stood a small, weathered cabin, barely visible through the trees. No smoke from the chimney, no footprints around the door, just the silent wilderness. This was the end of the trail. The agents approached cautiously. They knew the Unabomber was a master of traps. Inside, Ted Kaczynski sat alone, scribbling in a notebook. When agents knocked, Ted didn't resist. He answered the door calmly, silently. He didn't ask why they were there. He knew. Once inside, agents quickly realized this wasn't just a hideout. It was a factory of terror. The walls were lined with glass jars containing chemical precursors, handwritten bomb construction diagrams, makeshift tools Ted had crafted himself. On a crude wooden table, a fully assembled bomb ready to ship, spools of wire, carved wooden casings. In a corner, they found Ted's typewriter, the very machine used to draft the manifesto. But the true horror was stacked against the walls. More than 40,000 pages of journals, most written in meticulous code. Inside were detailed accounts of every bombing, marked clinically. Experiment 6, successful. Experiment 11, incomplete detonation. Logs of surveillance notes on prospective victims, lists of targets Ted had yet to attack. Agents also recovered components for additional bombs, hand-drawn maps, tools for crafting triggers, explosives, and fuses. An improvised darkroom where Ted photographed some of his own devices for records. Ted had also kept clippings of every news article about his bombings. A collection of his own writings, manuscripts never sent, letters he had started to mail to new targets but never finished. And most disturbingly, a coded journal entry, later decrypted, in which Ted detailed his hope to soon take out a major airline executive and cause disruption at the national level. Inside this tiny hand-built shack, investigators uncovered the operational base for the longest-running domestic bombing campaign in U.S. history. Ted Kaczynski didn't just live here. He waged his war from here. Every component, every letter, every bomb was crafted with bare hands in this forest hermitage. There was no electricity, no running water, no heat but the stove. Yet for nearly 2 decades, Ted had operated without suspicion. He never fled. He never hid. He simply watched, listened, and waited. The agents loaded Ted into the back of a vehicle as the Montana winds whistled through the pines. The hermit had been found, but the war he started was far from over. Ted Kaczynski entered the courtroom wearing the same blank expression that had unsettled the FBI agents who first found him. His defense team quickly realized they were not just defending a man. They were defending a mind that refused to bend. Psychiatrists diagnosed him with paranoid schizophrenia, noting his social withdrawal, disordered thinking, and obsessive paranoia. But Ted rejected the diagnosis. He refused to allow his lawyers to present an insanity defense. In his eyes, he was not insane. He was correct. He demanded to represent himself. The court denied the request. Ted was furious, not for fear of punishment, but because he feared he would be portrayed as crazy, someone who could be dismissed. Ted wanted to be judged for his ideas, not his mental state. He sat quietly throughout the proceedings. He showed no remorse, no emotion when his victims' families spoke, no flinch as prosecutors outlined the bombings in chilling detail. But Ted's journals told a different story. They revealed a man obsessed with control. He meticulously logged every bombing's intended purpose, the scientific results of each explosion, his analysis of FBI behavior, his reasoning behind sparing some targets while condemning others. Ted was calculating, not chaotic. He believed he was waging a legitimate war against the industrial system and its architects. His actions were, in his mind, rational, necessary, and morally justified. After weeks of testimony, Ted Kaczynski was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. He was transported to ADX Florence, America's most secure supermax prison, nicknamed the Alcatraz of the Rockies. There, Ted entered a cell just 7 by 12 feet, spending 23 hours a day in isolation. His only window faced a concrete wall. Yet even behind those walls, Ted never surrendered his ideology. He refused family visits, including from David. He selectively corresponded with academics and journalists, only those who showed genuine interest in his ideas, not in the crimes. His manifesto, once viewed as the ravings of a madman, became required reading in some universities, debated in environmental ethics courses, studied in counterterrorism seminars, and controversially praised by some radical movements. His influence rippled beyond the bars. In interviews from prison, Ted maintained, "I don't regret the bombings." To him, the manifesto mattered more than the lives it cost. For decades, Ted remained locked away, writing letters, defending his ideology, and refusing to reconcile with his family. In June 2023, Ted Kaczynski was found dead in his cell. His death marked the end of a man, but not the end of his influence. Today, his writings still circulate. His story remains a subject of fascination. His warped philosophy continues to haunt those who dare to read it. Ted Kaczynski was not just a bomber. He was a man who chose to become a prophet of destruction. A man who believed until his last breath that he had been the one to see the truth. Ted Kaczynski believed he was saving humanity. He saw himself as a revolutionary, not a killer. Every bomb, every victim, every drop of fear, all in his mind served a purpose. But what happens when murder has no purpose? When terror isn't justified by philosophy, but driven by pure, unfiltered evil? Ted meticulously built bombs, but the next killer? He wielded fear with his bare hands. Next week, we descend from the cold forests of Montana into the neon-lit streets of Los Angeles, where night itself became the weapon. A man who didn't want to save the world. He only wanted to see it burn. The Night Stalker, Richard Ramirez, coming soon on The Mind of a Killer.